Hello and welcome to the KPI Institute's webinar, Building a KPI System. My name is Andre Costa and I will be your host for today, along with our presenter, Eric Peterson. This webinar is part of a series of free educational materials that aim to enhance the knowledge and know-how of those interested, while also creating a bridge between us as a company and you, our public. The KPI Institute is a research organization specialized in business performance. It operates research programs in 12 practice domains, each linked to a certification course, ranging from strategy and KPIs to employee performance, and from customer service to innovation performance. Today, 14 years after the KPI Institute was created, we can proudly say that our products have reached professionals in 5 continents, and that our public comprises a worldwide community of 73,000 members online and 28,000 registered companies on smartkpis.com. Today's webinar will cover best practices in solution design while explaining how to define your business logic, how to include analytics, and how to best work with your system solution of choice. It will be delivered by Eric Peterson, Innovation Manager at Corporator. Eric has more than 11 years of experience with Corporator, where he and his team use their product expertise to bring business ideas to life within the Corporator Business Management Platform. He has been a speaker at numerous industry events throughout the world. This presentation lasts between 30 to 45 minutes. Please feel free to ask any questions you might have during the webinar, as they will be answered at the end of the presentation in our Q&A session. Enjoy the KPI Institute and Corporator's webinar, Building a KPI System. Now, I would like to invite Eric to begin his presentation.
All right, thank you and welcome. Again, my name is Eric Peterson. I'm the Innovation Manager at Corporator, a software company, and we develop, sell, and implement a business management platform. I guess you could say that I'm half technology and half business in my role, but I will try to keep this webinar all business so that it makes sense to people. And that is really my focus, is understanding business needs and meeting those needs using technology. I guess you could say bridging the gap between business and technology, or business and IT. I've worked with all sorts of companies throughout the world, so my topics today are taken from a wide variety of influences that I've experienced from working in the field, and my focus will be more on the practical side of things rather than the theoretical. We have to all live and work in the real world, so hopefully this will be much more than a thought exercise. So let's get started. I have an ambitious agenda today, and it's about building a KPI system. It's going to be less about the content and how to select KPIs. It's more about getting them in some sort of system, or using technology to support workflow and reporting and those sorts of things. My main points today are the fundamental ways that KPI systems are built. And we'll discuss business agility, the importance of having a holistic system, and talk about general capabilities or general functionality, the things that you should look for. And I guess at the end, you'll have to pardon, there's a helicopter right outside my window. But at the end, I'll run through a very brief demo. But before we get started, I think we should maybe define what a KPI system actually is. And I think most people have seen this sort of image before. And I think it really illustrates the concept that the answer really depends on who you ask. Because KPI systems can be used for a variety of reasons. They can be used for strategy management. They can be used for operational performance management. They can be used from organizational performance down to individual performance. But I think, for most people, it's even a variety of whether they actually are key performance indicators, or maybe they're just legacy metrics that they've already reported on. People can report using Excel, which if you get into Excel, you see it has this kind of KPI concept baked into it. You see this in dashboards such as Power BI or ClickView, or those types of solutions. And of course, there's special performance management systems as well. But rather than taking a really close-up look at KPIs, let's step back a minute and look at how and why they are used, and looking at the business language that they speak. So instead of just looking at them as a measure, what business language are we talking about? In my last webinar, I discussed the topic about how a KPI should be more than a number, about how it should tell a story, and about how a story should be wrapped in some sort of context that it gets from a business framework. And these business frameworks can include things like strategy management or risk or compliance. And since we're talking about business now and not just numbers, we also want KPIs to help us do something. We want them to help us make some sort of impact on the business. We want it to cause some sort of change. So we don't want to just measure performance, but we want to move performance in a certain direction. And that direction is defined by the framework, such as to improve quality, to reduce defects if it's a quality improvement KPI, or maybe it's to reduce injuries or accidents or incidents if it's a health or safety KPI. But you get the idea. There's some sort of framework behind it. So back to today's topic, how to build a KPI system. I guess, why is this even a topic? And I think to begin with, we find that many KPI projects fail. I've seen a statistic, and we'll come to this a little later, but it says that 70% of business intelligence projects do not deliver value, or they do not deliver a business impact. And I guess the point here is I use the word business intelligence projects. And I think that's significant because a lot of KPI projects are actually delivered as business intelligence projects, or at the very least, they're delivered through some sort of business intelligence tools, such as traditional data dashboards or spreadsheets or some sort of stack of technology. But why and how are these projects failing? I think this is a good illustration, and this is something that we actually got in the content of a tender from a company that was looking at replacing an existing KPI system that they were using. And you can start to see that they have a challenge. And if you take a close look here, you can see that this is not a company that's new to KPIs or KPI systems, but rather this is a result of a hard lesson learned. You could say it's an expensive exercise in a project that didn't give the results that they needed. And if we look at why, we can start to see that for them, the system was not flexible enough, that it was too rigid and it lacked agility. And from there, the problem starts to cascade, because with the lack of agility, it means that they're dependent on support from their suppliers to make even minor adjustments to their system. And of course, this is very costly to the customer. And if you think about a KPI system, I mean, we should just expect that it's in a constant state of adjustment. This isn't like a budgeting solution or an ERP system that covers a fixed set of processes or fixed business structures. This is a performance management system that will be in a constant state of evolution, that's adjusted to meet changing business conditions, or to have the content refreshed for different planning cycles, and on, but it should be easy to change. And then I guess the other issue in the middle, you can see that it's not seamlessly integrated. It's not integrated with other aspects of performance management. And that's another challenge when you start looking at point solutions, is they tend to be rather isolated in their view or in their reach. So if we look at how and why software can be said that it might be designed wrong, I will go over each of these points individually, but this is basically the agenda of today's webinar, to discuss how solutions are designed in each of these areas and how they should be designed with these main points, technology versus solutions, dealing with the topics of change and agility, the differences between point solutions and more of a holistic approach, and then the general business capability of the solutions. So let's dive right in, and we'll talk about technology versus a solution, and what's the difference. And in many ways, technology is like an element or an ingredient inside a solution. I mean, if you look at food, we've got all sorts of ingredients. I mean, you have something like flour. I mean, you can buy flour, but you wouldn't just want to eat it. You know, it's not a meal in and of itself. But you can use it for all sorts of things. You can bake a cake, or you can make a pizza, or you know, you can use it for all sorts of things. But normally you wouldn't go to a restaurant and order it off the menu as a finished meal. It becomes much more valuable and useful when you combine it with other ingredients. And that is similar to the difference between a technology stack and a business stack. That a technology stack is largely unfinished. It isn't a complete meal. It's not a complete solution. It's a bunch of pieces or a bunch of ingredients. And there's a gap between the technology and its ability to meet business needs. And we see that the statistics from Gartner that I was referring to, and they're a major technology analyst company, and they're the ones that state that 70% of IT projects fail to deliver their business results. And I think that one of the fundamental reasons this is that they're really based on this kind of data warehouse approach. And I've seen this in many customers where they have a very strong IT department and they have a powerful mandate to have a single version of the truth. And they're usually opposed to moving or copying data around. The IT department, if you speak with them, they will state that maybe 70 to 90% of the critical management information is there in the data warehouse. But if I talk to the people, in the business, the people who actually need the information, they'll report something along the lines that, maybe 30% of the information they need is in the data warehouse. And that's a huge gap just right there in the data alone. So a lot of these customers will fill in these gaps with all sorts of spreadsheets or these kind of local homegrown band-aids to help them get by. A lot of times they don't even tell the IT department what's going on and how they're working around them. But that's, I think, just starting out, is a data warehouse generally won't give a business all the information that they need, despite their best efforts. And I think this diagram also shows how the technology stack tends to focus on the visualization of the data. And this is usually through dashboards. And it's usually, with dashboards, the intention is to provide some sort of data insight. But again, there's a gap there because, if you just have insight without action, it's very difficult to enact some sort of change. I can have all the insights in the world how I could solve a problem, but unless I actually do something about it, nothing's going to change. And many of these technology stacks have these, this kind of approach where it's a performance reporting system. And if you really want to execute something, or if you want to move or transform performance, you have to handle these activities outside the system. And then it quickly becomes a problem to link everything together into one system. So this is where some of the critical missing functionality comes in. I've kind of categorized this a bit over on the right, but what we see is that a solution needs some sort of execution framework. This is the orange box. It's about having a business framework to tie everything together, and then that's the blue box. Some sort of framework, and that's a way to model the management elements that give a system context or meaning. This can be something like a balanced scorecard framework where metrics are organized. You might have perspectives and objectives and KPIs, and they're linked together in some way that makes them more meaningful. Or maybe you have some sort of quality framework or a compliance framework, or you're into continuous improvement or governance or risk or a benefit realization model for projects. Or you might have some individual performance framework, but there's countless models out there. But without a framework, all you end up with is a list of KPIs. And the users don't have a clear understanding of their purpose or how they are to be used. And then the process and execution layer is really about making KPIs actionable. And this can be at several different levels. It can include, the planning process, planning for performance improvement, or it can be about monitoring things like initiatives or action plans that you use to improve performance. Some of this might be as simple as just assigning accountability or responsibility for actions, setting timelines, and so on to try to increase accountability. Or it might be modeling things, having some sort of meeting, like a meeting room or meeting functionality, so that there's some follow-up and action trackers and so on. And there's many ways that this can be set up. But generally, a pure technology platform isn't going to have anything related to actions, execution, follow-up built into it. And if you try to build it, it can be complicated or expensive. The next item is about change in agility. And again, if you base a solution on a data warehouse approach, the business logic really controls the structure. So you're kind of locked to the data warehouse, the structure of the data warehouse. And I think it's important to remember what data warehouses are for. I mean, they're excellent for structured data. But I think in the real world, in business, and particularly when you get into different management domains, you find that there are always exceptions to these kinds of structures. There's always that business unit that was maybe recently acquired, or there's some remote office that has a fiscal year that starts in a different month, or you have some foreign office that can't use the same HR system due to some European data protection laws, or maybe a new business unit that's not yet on the same ERP system as the rest of the company. So there can be any number of exceptions. And how well can that system handle them, locally? So you need to expect that you're going to have exceptions. Even in how KPIs are handled, there are often exceptions. Like maybe you have a new manager or a new facility, or you're trying to establish or reestablish baseline performance. So you have different rules, different thresholds, and so on. And a good solution will let you adapt to these kind of changing needs or changing business conditions. Maybe these are just temporary needs, but you need that kind of flexibility. Or maybe it's just that the data simply isn't available in a data warehouse, or you need a manual input here, or you need to combine that manual input with some data in a data warehouse. So you really need something flexible, and that's where the business modeling comes in, where it's a little different than the data modeling, where you can pick out data that isn't in the data model and combine it with data that is. And I think that's really important for most customers, because I think it's generally unrealistic to expect that you're going to have this, monstrous data warehouse that's just going to feed you all the management information you need. And then if we want to discuss agility, we can discuss it at many different levels in an organization. The solution needs to be agile on the front end, so you can show different KPIs differently as needed. Generally financial KPIs are going to have much more information than maybe a quality KPI. Most people aren't going to forecast or budget accidents or injuries or those sorts of things. They just compare them to targets. While your financial data might have a lot more data points, there's much more data granularity into different account codes and so on. The processes themselves need to be agile. I think a lot of rules ultimately need to be dynamic, where it's more of a descriptive process where rules can be, described as a rule and reused. They're not just fixed. Calculations, tables, the templates behind KPIs, everything should be reusable to make it easy to maintain and easy to get out there. But of course, you should also have the option of editing these globally so that you can manage a large project centrally. So you have the best of both worlds. You can either have an edit everything all at once, or the ability to make local changes on specific business units, for example. But the point is that this agility and flexibility is at the business modeling layer. And a system won't work if all the modeling occurs at the data level. So there needs to really be a separation between business and the data layer so that it can handle exceptions, so that you can model these kind of rules, and it just so you can generally meet the needs of business. Moving on to number 3, and this is where we talk a bit about having a holistic view of performance. And what does this mean? And I see it as meaning that we can link multiple functional domains together. I mean, I think in reality they're linked together. So, why shouldn't they be linked together in a system? And if we look in more detail, it looks something like this. Finance, projects, risk, quality, HR operations, everything ends up being linked together in some way. We can't reach our goals or our targets if we don't have the right people, or if we're not making the right investments. But then what are our goals? They might be defined by our strategy. What keeps us from reaching our goals? Well, those might be the risks. What do we need to do to reach our goals? Those might be contained in our portfolio of projects or initiatives, but you get the idea. And I think that's the thing, is that many KPI systems end up being as, they're point solutions, or they're part of a point system. I mean, today you could say a KPI is almost a generic concept. I mean, it's so generic that Excel has something they call a KPI, but what is it in Excel? It's just a row in a table. And I think we need KPIs that are richer than that. We need KPIs that can have commentary, so you can make your assessment, put some words behind the numbers. We need KPIs that can easily show a history, maybe that they're linked to an objective or a purpose. Maybe these objectives are linked to initiatives and risks. And then this is where we start getting into the storytelling behind KPIs, of showing performance through many different lenses, through multiple levels, whether it's strategic, tactical, and operational. And then you start to have a comprehensive system. And in terms of a comprehensive system, what does it need in terms of capability? And this is where we start getting into I guess you could say, the details of business requirements. And our approach has been to in essence to decode business, to offer building blocks or tools to help people measure and collect data, assess, approve, analyze, publish, and so on. And we've done it across multiple management domains, and broken that down into many different building blocks that can be put together in a flexible way to meet the needs of business. So if we take a closer look at capability and how business capability is different than technological capability, and I think if we just use this as an example, if we look at something like report automation, I find that many of the customers that I work with, despite having all sorts of fancy tools, still end up having a manual process in reporting. And I think this is just kind of a good example of when we talk about capability. For all the technology we have, reporting ends up being cutting and pasting from a variety of tools, maybe into a Word document or into a PowerPoint, and this becomes very time consuming because this issue really starts to cascade. Because if you need to make an update in one cell in a table, it might impact all sorts of charts and graphs and so on. And I worked with a bank where I think it was over a full-time job. This was just a small bank, but if you added all the hours up, it was huge just to prepare for the management meeting report. For them, the process involved a bunch of managers cutting and pasting content into a report that was emailed around, adding a bunch of comments in the email, and then the meeting owners would take these reports and they would add up manually the key figures based on what was submitted. And of course, there would be late changes to the data, and then those updates would need to be reflected in the charts and graphs. And it was a real mess because changing a value meant updating it everywhere, and a few iterations of these changes from several managers, and you can see how time-consuming it gets. So I don't know. This is another statistic I read somewhere. It said 85 hours. It seems a bit arbitrary. It's probably a bit low, but I have no doubt that 95% of reports have some sort of cut and paste in them. And I think this kind of comes back to the difference between how business solutions look and how IT see things. Like if we look at something like this as a report, this is ultimately what we want to digitalize and what we want to automate. But I think what you start to see is that the BI people, they care about the charts and the tables. They just see this type of view, the numbers, the data. That's what a report is to them. But I think if we look at what business needs, they really want to focus on telling the story. They want the evaluative information, the narrative, the commentary, the assessment, and the charts and the graphs, the data. That's really designed or should be designed to support the story as evidence. It's not the story. It's not the report. The report is really the evaluative information, as I see it. So again, how should it be built? We discussed on this briefly already, but we've taken a look at what a business solution needs and kind of broken it down into its molecules or its building blocks. You could say that it's like decoding business. And again, another way of looking at this is that the data ends up only being a small piece of all of this. And again, if we talk about data, we're talking about the quantitative stuff. We're talking about the bits of data, if you will. So as we start to move beyond these building blocks and starting to put these together in some way to actually visualize the data, this is where we need to have that kind of business context that I've talked about a bit earlier, and where I've talked about it more in linking it to a business framework. But this is, one thing where traditional dashboards don't really address the needs of business, because for a traditional data dashboard, those are typically like a flat report, and they're really based on filters. There's really no model associated with it, or there's no framework. There's no navigation. It's just a series of filters. Whereas a good KPI solution will give you more of a context. You'll know clearly what the business unit is, what the reporting period is. It lets you navigate. It shows you where there's organizational depth, or maybe you have some sort of model depth to it, where you have metrics or KPIs that are categorized or organized in some sort of way, where a KPI can be both, it can exist as both a row, in a table, and it can exist as its own page where it can really tell its own story. So it's not just a row in a table. It's comprehensive with comments and history and all sorts of things. So, and again, with the capability part, we need to have data as evidence to support the story, analytics to give us some insights, and then to put those insights into action through processes, and then that kind of business framework to tie everything together. So with the data, again, it's evidence. It's not the whole story. It supports the story. And a lot of data in a KPI system probably is not going to be in a source system in a data warehouse. There's all sorts of softer metrics that I see customer needing. A lot of these might just be like in spreadsheets or in employees' heads, but they need to be brought into a system some way. And this really applies to businesses of all sizes. I mean, some giant companies rely really heavily on this kind of evaluative information that's not in data warehouses. And again, with the analytics, this isn't just analytics for analyzing results. Analytics can also be used as part of the target setting or goal setting process. So it's not just about what we have achieved, but it's also about what is achievable, and what do we need to achieve or impact to reach other objectives or goals. So I think you get the idea there. And then the process is, how do we make things happen? What is our roadmap? How can we reach our goals? We can't always ask employees to perform better or faster or more efficiently without giving them a plan. It's not good for the psychology of the organization. So part of this is motivational, and part of it is practical. But if you want to increase productivity, for example, maybe you need to invest in certain areas or change your processes somewhere. But you need a plan for how to improve. And then there's the business model itself, and that's, again, the framework. It's the rules. It's the structure, related to evaluating performance. It really gives users or your employees an understanding of the context of how they're intended to look at performance. We don't just turn people loose and say, it's time to manage performance or it's time to improve. There's all sorts of frameworks out there, and in my experience, I think actually every customer ends up being very unique and eclectic in how they work, where they combine all sorts of elements from multiple management frameworks. They don't, strictly follow a singular framework, but they have these unique needs, and they need a solution that can model these unique needs. And you don't really get that, directly out of the box unless you have a flexible solution that has these kind of building blocks where you can build up your model, and you can combine elements from multiple models into one solution. And then this really requires, an approach where you have a toolkit to support it. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to jump into just a very, very brief demo. I'll try not to make it too salesy, and it's just to illustrate some of these points in action. Let me just start with the homepage here. Again, this is about giving users some navigation or some context where it's very clear, what reporting period we're at. We have some breadcrumbs. So, again, it's just illustrating that this isn't just a filter, but it's actually navigation. And I see a lot of our customers use this kind of approach where they have a landing page and they organize content, so it's very clear. If I want to go in through strategy, if I want to go in purely through performance or improvement initiatives and so on. But I'm going to go into strategy here for a second. And this brings us to a more detailed map or dashboard where you can have some highlights, you can have some key figures, some organizational navigation and so on. But rather than bombarding people with a ton of metrics on a page, this gives them just a very concise view, and it also can organize metrics. So if we want to describe the purpose, we want to talk about our strategic focus, maybe our tactical, operational. We can break things down, organize things visually, and then kind of have these status indicators and so on. If we click into tactical focus, this takes us into even more details where you can have this sort of dashboard view. So again, we're just kind of moving from general information into more details. And we can move across here, but we can have content organized in tabs. Like if we talk about performance, this is where we start talking about this kind of framework approach where we have KPIs, and they're organized and categorized under objectives and maybe organized within perspectives. But it gives people that kind of context. Why are we looking at total income? Well, we're trying to broaden our revenue mix, and this is very clearly one of our financial KPIs. And of course, if you want to go into further details, you can of course click into any of these and get the charts, graphs, history, and so on. So there's a lot of depth to the data if you want to set it up that way. But also, talking about the processes involved, we can set up these kind of plans, improvement initiatives, for instance. So what are the things that we're doing to improve performance? If you go into something like one of these initiatives, you can drill into the details, like expand revenue sources. We can, link out the activities. Should plot the progress on Gantt charts and track the cost. I see a lot of customers now are using some sort of benefit realization model where they look at calculating the cost and the benefits to the organization that they intend to get as part of their prioritization for projects or improvement initiatives. And then while these things are live, what they do is they monitor and see, are these actually delivering the benefits that we had hoped for? Do they have, have we given them the right amount of resources? Some of these things, if you give them even more resources, the benefits increase exponentially. Others, you can detect early on that, this is going to be a complete waste of time and resources. We're just going to abandon this, and so on. But there's all sorts of different approaches. Some customers also do various ways to sign off on these or stage gate these so that they can track, how did we end up with this? How did we decide on this? So that if there's problems down the road, they don't just blame each other. They know how they arrived at this decision and so on. You can also model in things like this where you might also classify risks and those sorts of things. This might be a better view where you have these kind of risk dashboards and you discuss, or you track or you monitor the issues or things that could potentially get in the way of meeting the goals and objectives. Another way is to kind of hold people accountable by maybe tracking these things in management meetings where you review the progress of goals and objectives. You track accountability, you follow the timelines and so on. And again, talking about this evidence-based approach, where you have the data to back up the story. You can embed analytics and drill down and slice and dice, use different tools to really analyze the data at a very granular level. And then you might have, I think this will be probably my last view here, but this is where you might have things like key projects. This could be like a project portfolio view. We have a dashboard of the projects that are ultimately linked back to your goals and objectives, or maybe to your strategy, or whatever framework you're using. But these are the sorts of investments that you're making at a very high level, and then you could drill down into these and look at the activity reports and cost reports and resources used and so on. But I hope this gives you some idea of how you can put things together. And in this very, very brief demo, I'm just trying to show how different management disciplines can be linked together, like projects, risks, improvement initiatives, just standard metrics and KPIs. And of course, if you go into these, also you can get into the things like the commentary that we talked about, and also this view that this is a KPI, but this KPI has its own page. It doesn't just exist as a row in a table like you find in a lot of other tools. You can build an entire story around it, link it together to other disciplines, other management needs, and so on. So what I think I'll do here is I will return back to our host, and I just want to very briefly thank you for attending, and we can get into the question and answers if there are any.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Eric. As Eric has mentioned, if anyone has any questions, queries, curiosities of any sort, we are more than delighted to answer them now. All right, we've already received a first question. What are the best ways of bringing data from spreadsheets to the KPI system? How to make it continuous, apart from the obvious answer of automatizing it?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but I mean, there's a couple ways that this can be done. Most tools today have some way where you can extract data from spreadsheets. Like you can upload spreadsheets and you can pull the data from them, and then use a business layer. Like in our solution, you would use our own business layer once the data is in, to have this business-friendly way of making calculations. But you can also extract content from spreadsheets, because a lot of customers use spreadsheets just kind of as worksheets for building out their models. So they might have like a library of metrics or KPIs on a spreadsheet, or maybe a library of risk factors on a spreadsheet. Those can be imported directly in. So you kind of have both approaches, where you can import content and you can import the data itself. And I think there's some value to that, because spreadsheets are very, very flexible and very easy to use. But on the other hand, spreadsheets can be really messy too, because people can, I don't know, they just add a column, or they start messing around with the calculations. It's really easy to have errors in those. So a lot of times it's really good for a starting point, but it might not be the best way or the most sustainable way to import data, as a long-term solution.
All right, thank you very much for your answer. The next query we've received: can you extract data from SAP?
We can. I can't speak for other solutions, but it's such a commonly used solution. We have a lot of customers in Europe that are using that, and so we've got connectors, and there's different ways of integrating with SAP, but we've got a lot of experience with that.
All right. Now, another question we've received right now is, what are some problems with rewarding managers with cash bonuses if they exceed targets for their KPIs?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential problems. I mean, one is that the whole target setting process actually becomes more like the bonus negotiation game, because it's not about what the company thinks they can get. It's more about, how the manager is planning his own bonus. So, I mean, I think you have some sub-optimization in terms of the target setting that can occur. The other is that if you base it solely on a set of metrics, you basically give those metrics undue weighting related to other metrics in the system. So I think you can run into those types of challenges as well, that if it's not a bonusable metric, people aren't going to care about it. And sometimes some of the most important metrics are not the easiest ones to attach bonuses to, or the easiest ones to measure. And then you run into all sorts of issues with trying to quantify those as well, because they end up being soft metrics.
Alrighty. Now, another attendee asked how to avoid very useful but complex KPI systems becoming a burden in terms of maintenance from the business perspective, not only the IT side. And as an example, providing unautomated data, keeping track of improvement initiatives, risks, commentary, etc. How can one find a balance between complexity and the value this system would bring?
I think a lot of that comes down to for starters, a lot of customers that I see come to us having used Excel, and they're really used to this kind of Excel approach. And if you think about Excel, it really gives you a flat table. You can have multiple worksheets, but it's really difficult to navigate in terms of both time and business unit, for instance, unless you're going to set up macros and all those sorts of things. So I think a lot of customers, have these complex scorecards because they're used to having to put everything on one page, or they have a limited number of dimensions to work with. And I think the first thing is to try to rethink how they want to present performance, to start to simplify things. I think a lot of times customers also are a bit unwilling to question some of their legacy metrics. They've always included certain things in reports, and at this stage, nobody even really knows why, other than that's how they've always done it. And they don't really think about the hidden cost of collecting the data and continuing to report and so on. So I think if I have any advice at all, it's just to start with something that's simple. And we've even had some really big customers that they don't really even focus on data integration and data automation and the high level of data granularity that you can have in a system. They want people to really own their data, and sometimes it's in their own desire or interest to have these kind of fewer data points and to have it manually entered where people really own the data. That's another approach. But I think the biggest thing is just to focus on keeping it simple, keeping it usable, and don't over-engineer it just because you have technology and just because you can over-engineer it.
So would you specify this as being also an answer to a question another attendee posed, which is where do you start when implementing a KPI or performance management system, because it seems to be a very daunting endeavor? Would you concur that keeping things simple when starting would be a fair response?
Absolutely, and I think a lot of our customers get it. I mean, they start out with these RFIs and an RFP, and they have all of these complicated requirements that they put in that. But that's more because they want a system that they can grow with over time, but that's not necessarily where they start. And I think there's a lot of value in even starting something simple, having things centrally managed, and having some processes put into place that are really supported by some sort of tool. That's really the best starting place, and not worrying about capturing every bit of information and every process and everything under the sun just because you can.
All right, now we've received another follow-up question. how to best incorporate sustainability information about an organization, including elements about the environment, health, and safety performance.
I don't know that that's really a technology question as much as it is a content question. I mean, you can model these things. I mean, if you can measure it, there's all sorts of KPIs out there, or objectives, or you know, content concepts, and it's just a matter of putting them in the software. Some of these things, if it's just a pure safety, you know, HSE type metric, you know, there are HSE systems. I mean, we work a lot in the oil and gas industry. You know, they have whole systems that manage incidents and that sort of thing that we can collect. But generally, when you get into sustainability, a lot of these things are more softer metrics, more evaluative, more qualitative than quantitative. And there's all sorts of interesting ideas out there for how to capture those in a system. And a lot of it involves this kind of evaluative information. It's not necessarily in a data warehouse, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Now, we've received a couple of questions about building a KPI system for specific sectors, such as the education sector or academic sector. Do you have a few quick thoughts on this?
Well, again, you know, some of these things, when it comes to the academic sectors, if it's higher education, you know, you have the issues of accreditation, and there's a lot of compliance issues that can be modeled in the system. So you can use it for multiple purposes. I mean, it's not just about providing academic excellence to students, or a good work, you know, attractive workplace to the faculty. It's also about, you know, maintaining your accreditation so you can continue to get funding and so on. So I mean, there's many different dimensions that these things can come together. What I think is interesting, though, is that I've seen some really innovative companies that are really looking to share their baseline data with other companies that even would be considered competitors, that they see that this can be kind of a win-win situation to cooperate and to you know, benchmark and collaborate on certain metrics. Obviously, you know, their core business strategy and you know, the things that give them a competitive advantage and those sorts of things are not things that they're so interested in sharing, and that's not really the point. But things, especially things related to HSE, things related to improving overall, like the environment. There's kind of a trend of trying to have more transparency from organization to organization. I don't know how effective this will be, you know, and how willing people will be to embrace that kind of concept. But I just think it's an interesting thought that I'm seeing more and more of. At least it's a desire that a lot of organizations are having these days.
Alrighty. Now, before I ask the next question, I first have to ask, are you familiar with OneStream or Tagetik?
Yes, Tagetik I am, yes.
All right. So someone asked, what is your unique differentiator, Corporator's differentiator, compared to tools like OneStream or Tagetik?
Yeah, I don't really want to turn this into a sales pitch. You know, we can take some of this type of question offline, but I think what you would see with our solution is that we are more of a business management platform. It's almost, we're more into like the overall digitalization of management practices and business processes, and like trying to capture the operating system of a business, if you will. And so we can link together all sorts of management disciplines as I've described here, whereas something like Tagetik is a bit more of a corporate performance management system with a bit more of a financial focus. and more of a specialty in that area. And I think you find there's a lot of good solutions out there, but you also have to realize, their strengths and weaknesses, what they're intended to do, what they're not intended to do. And I think if it's a corporate performance solution, they tend to be more on the planning and budgeting side of things.
All right, thank you very much for your replies, Eric, and that also brings us to the end of our Q&A session, end of our webinar. Do you have any last words for our listeners?
I just want to thank everybody for attending, and you're welcome to contact me or our team if you want to get more information about our product, or if you want any follow-up information, white papers on KPI systems and so on.
Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
The KPI Institute appreciates your interest in the webinar Building a KPI System. Follow our websites and our social media channels to find out more details about our next webinars when they get posted. Also, if you are interested in getting a certification granted by the KPI Institute on vital areas within the performance management discipline, you can explore our scheduled courses on marketplace.kpiinstitute.org. Moreover, if you need more clarity regarding your performance data, we highly recommend you go over at corporator.com and take a look at their platform, as it provides a comprehensive approach to managing information. It can be very easily customized in numerous ways, and so far, it has a 95% customer retention rate, which speaks for itself. Thank you once again for your participation. We wish you the best of performance and have a nice day.